The goal of this documentary is to observe and discuss the places and spaces of World War I and II. We will look at post-war landscapes and how nature has recovered, or in some cases, how the land has never fully recovered. We will also be taking a look into the memorialization of war, the ways in which we will memorialize it, and how it takes a toll on the landscape. The Coliseum was a location that was held specifically for active Nazi Party members. The main purpose was for the Nuremberg rally that occurred between 1923 and 1938. The rallies consisted primarily of propaganda events and showing off the power of the National Socialism of Germany. These events increased when Adolf Hitler rose to power. They typically took place in late August and early September, and lasted several days and sometimes even up to a week. Many people attended, including party members, journalists, and reporters, to hear Adolf Hitler's speech. His speeches often consisted of National Socialism and new orders for the Nazi Party. During the rallies, the Nazi Party would march through the grounds in a very pristine form. There are different colors of squares located on the ground. This was to help the Nazi Party with directions and also to count each step. During our last day in Germany, we visited these marching grounds. The space is not used for anything today, but only to remember what terrible plans were made during these rallies. On D-Day, June 5, 1944, the American military stormed France's beaches in Normandy to liberate France from Nazi Germany. The ensuing battles from these invasions left indelible marks on the land, which we can still see today. Pointe du Hoc is a former German fortification on a beachside cliff that American troops climbed to disarm the Germans stationed there. Now, the memorial site is peppered with craters from American and German bombs and shells. Natural paths made by tourists crisscross their way through and around these craters, and weeds that grow too high in the area are cut down to maintain the beachhead's purpose as a site for visitation and memorialization. The scars of war, then, are purposely prevented from naturally healing for the sake of memorialization. Nearby, in the small town of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, is the Utah Beach D-Day Museum, founded by former Mayor Michel de Galaville. During World War II, the town was under German occupation and was the site of the D-Day paratroopers drop zone. This location and other towns along the D-Day landing zone keep the events of the war alive through memorialization and tourism, not by maintaining scars on the ground, but through tourism marketed to visitors from the Allied nations. Galaville, a citizen, was an interesting figure in his own right. Accidentally shot 5 times by American soldiers in World War II, he recuperated in a British hospital. When he returned to his hometown, he was elected mayor in 1949 and made the decision to build the museum in 1962. In reference to how World War I and World War II has affected the landscapes of the places we visited, we have seen how the beaches of Normandy, at Utah, Pointe du Hoc, and Omaha have been scarred by warfare. Moving away from the battlefield locations, it's time to explore the memorial scars of warfare with the beautiful American memorial sites at the Luxembourg American Cemetery and the Martyrs Memorial in Bastogne. The American Cemetery in Luxembourg consists of close to 50 acres, breaking down into 17 acres of grassy lawns and 33.5 acres of woods surrounding the memorial. Standing front and center when you arrive through the gates is the Memorial Chapel, a stone monument encased with copper that reads, "In proud remembrance of the achievements of her sons and in humble tribute to their sacrifices, this memorial has been erected by the United States of America. The inside of the chapel provides an altar where those who wish can go to pray, with an inscription reading, "I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish." The cemetery was established on December 29, 1944 by the 609th Quartermaster Company of the U.S. Third Army, while the Allied forces were fighting off the Ardennes offensive. What's important to note about this memorial site is that it was completely funded by the U.S. government, and the U.S. pays for upkeep of the property. The land is considered part of the U.S. territory, which is a consequence of war on landscape. Similar things can be said about the Martison Memorial, commemorating American soldiers who were wounded or killed at the Battle of the Bulge. The first steps to creating the memorial were taken July 4, 1946 by President Harry Truman. The official dedication was on July 16, 1950. Shaped like a five-pointed American star, it is covered with passages carved in stone commemorating the battle. It also bears the names of all 50 states. This memorial pays special attention to the battalions who participated in the battle, with greater losses by commemorating the battalions on the walls more prominently. This represents the 76,890 killed and wounded during the Rhine Offensive from December 1944 to January 1945. Both the American cemeteries and the Martison Memorial are beautifully kept up, and the land around the land plots appears to have disappeared the physical travesties of the environment caused by World War II. On July 6, our group visited the Sandweiler German War Cemetery in Luxembourg. Here we saw hundreds of graves of German soldiers from World War I and World War II. Interestingly enough, the government does not fund nor maintain the cemetery. It is actually through the German War Grave Commission that such a site exists. The German War Grave Commission aims to care for the graves of the victims of war and violence. In the border region of Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, the battles in the winter and spring of 1945 claimed many lives. The Volksbund recovered over 5,300 dead from 150 areas in Luxembourg and expanded the German burial site at Sandweiler into a cemetery with financial assistance from members and donors and with federal government subsidies. On June 5, 1955, the war cemetery, in which 10,913 fallen German soldiers rest, was publicly inaugurated. Visiting the German War Cemetery immediately after our visit to the American War Cemetery allowed for some comparing and contrasting. The American cemetery was perfectly symmetrical, clean, well marked, with locations and directions, very green grass, and white tombstones. The German cemetery was very different. The location was tucked away, the grounds were not as maintained, and there were field mice running around everywhere just outside the cemetery, and the tombstones were worn and eroded. Inside the Hofgarten is a memorial for the fallen German soldiers of World War I and II. This memorial is located directly in front of the state agency of the German Free State of Bavaria. To enter the memorial, you must walk downstairs into a covered room somewhat resembling a raised cellar, however, with many openings. On the walls of this memorial there are many German inscriptions. One wall had an inscription that translates to, "For our dead." Another read, "They will rise." The main inscription read, "Built by the Umpire District, Munich City of the Bavarian Warrior League, for the 13,000 fallen heroic sons of the city of Munich, 1914 to 1918. In regards to places and spaces, it is interesting that such a memorial would be placed in front of such a proficient state agency, or perhaps locating said agency in front of the memorial. With the location of the memorial, it is as if the state is looking at it every day, remembering those who served their country. During our time in Trier, we came across what are called stumbling stones. The German word for these is Stolpersteine. These stumbling stones are small brass squares inscribed with the names of individuals along with details of their death. These individuals were Jews and some were survivors of the Holocaust. The stumbling stones are placed where Jews who were taken from their homes once lived. These stumbling stones are placed there by non-profit organizations. Dachau opened in 1933, and the memorial site on the grounds of the former concentration camp was established in 1965 on the initiative of and in accordance with the plans of the surviving prisoners who had joined together to form the Comité International de Dachau. Many prisoners of Dachau were Polish, homosexual, Jehovah's Witnesses, immigrants, and political prisoners. Dachau was liberated by U.S. Army troops in 1945. Obviously not dedicated as a memorial to specifically Germans, Dachau is much more than that. However, it proves to be an important memorial in regards to German Jews and various other parties whose lives were taken here. The memorialization of this camp is crucial in stressing that history must not repeat itself. Where once stood a thriving village, there is now only craters and trees that have been planted there since the war. There are traces of what looks like to be a wash house, but without a post addressing the spot, most would glance over the rubble with a careless eye. There is another plaque for where a school once stood, but no remains of the schoolhouse are evident. The rest of the village is covered with grass and trees. Most would never know the village existed without the memorialization of it. The forest of Verdun was planted with German pines from the Black Forest as part of war reparations and repairs to France. The original purpose of these pines was to aid in the recovery of the land that had been destroyed by war. It also preserved the land as it was in 1918 after the Battle of Verdun. The trenches and holes that were made by the shells have not been flattened or built over. Not every shell that was dropped exploded. During the course of the battle, the land had become muddy from the rain. There are still unknown numbers of shells embedded in the earth. The land where most of the bombing took place is too dangerous for living or farming. There are red zones in the forest where shells are still being found today. Shells will continue to surface for the next 150 years as the earth continues to push them out. Shells are not the only thing that sunk into the mud and have remained uncovered for over 100 years. 80,000 to 100,000 men still remain uncovered from the forest. The exact number will never be known. Delmont-Ossuary is a French cemetery where those who fought and died at the Battle of Verdun are now laid to rest. Interestingly, this cemetery has monuments for not only Christians who were killed, but also Jews and Muslims. Their headstones are also differing depending on the soldier's religious affiliation.